All right, let's get right into it. We're going to explore one of the most powerful and sometimes devastating forces in all of human history, the lines we draw to separate ourselves from each other. You know, whether they're drawn on a map, in our minds, or deep within our societies, these lines, they have the power to create nations, to spark wars, and to define the very essence of who we are.
So, this quote, it's about a man named Sir Cyril Radcliffe. He was a brilliant British lawyer who was given this absolutely monumental task: draw out the border between India and Pakistan. But here's the catch, and it is a big one. He had never, ever been to India. He knew pretty much nothing about its people, its geography, or its complex history. And the most astonishing part? That was actually seen as his greatest qualification.
And that really is the heart of what we're talking about today. How does that happen? We're going to see how a line scribbled on a map in a huge hurry tore a nation apart. We'll look at how lines drawn between ideas can literally redefine history itself. And we'll see how lines of conduct can create an identity so powerful it actually dictates who lives and who dies.
So let's start with that man, Radcliffe. He was picked for one reason, and one reason only. He was seen as totally neutral. He had zero connection to India, no bias towards Congress or the Muslim League. In the eyes of the British government, this detachment was a good thing. It was supposed to be the key to a fair and impartial partition.
5 weeks, just think about that. 5 weeks to decide the fate of millions. He shows up on July 8th and they tell him the deadline is August 15th. What he had to work with was just inadequate. We're talking outdated maps, totally unreliable census data, and advisors from both sides who, surprise, couldn't agree on a single thing. The British were just desperate to leave. One official even described the situation as sitting on top of a volcano. So his rushed decision, made behind closed doors in a hot Delhi room, would go down as one of history's most tragic experiments.
And you have to understand, this line on a map wasn't just some abstract idea. No, it created a brutal, physical reality on the ground. It was really the final act of this long-standing British policy of divide and rule, which had spent decades creating and exploiting cracks between religious communities. And now, those tiny cracks were about to become a massive, gaping chasm.
Okay, look closely at this timeline. See that gap? For 2 full days after independence was officially declared, millions of people in Punjab and Bengal had absolutely no idea which country they were living in. Can you imagine? District magistrates didn't know if they should report to Delhi or to Karachi. The border was deliberately kept a secret, a decision made by Lord Mountbatten himself, basically to prevent the inevitable outrage from ruining the Independence Day parties.
10 million. And that is a conservative estimate. That's the number of people uprooted by the Radcliffe line. Hindus and Sikhs who found themselves suddenly in the new Pakistan fled east. Muslims in the new India fled west. It spiraled into the largest and one of the most violent migrations in all of human history. The roads were just clogged with these human caravans, sometimes stretching for 50 miles.
It may be the most terrifying symbol of all of this chaos were the trains. People started calling them ghost trains. A train would leave one side of this new border, just packed with desperate refugees hoping for safety. But when it pulled into the station on the other side, hours later, it would just roll in with this eerie dead silence. Because it wasn't filled with hopeful passengers anymore, but with the bodies of those who'd been massacred along the way.
Just awful. This chilling message was found written in chalk on the side of one of those trains when it arrived in Amritsar from Pakistan. It just captured the unimaginable horror and the bitter poison that the partition had unleashed. As for Radcliffe, well, he refused his payment of £2,000, burned all of his papers, and he never, ever set foot in India again.
But you know, the most powerful lines aren't always the ones you can see on a map. Sometimes they're drawn right inside our minds. These are the lines of ideology that split one age from another, one entire worldview from the next.
So let's jump way back in time to the year 1000 AD. In Europe, the lines dividing people were just as stark. You've got this young emperor, Otto III, and his very existence, his heritage, represented the great divide of his time. See, his father was from the Latin-speaking West, but his mother was from the Greek-speaking Byzantine East. And he had this grand dream of uniting these two halves of the old Roman Empire, of healing the fractures in the Christian world.
Now this is a fantastic example of how later generations draw lines to define themselves. The great thinkers of the Renaissance, they looked back at the 1,000 years that came before them and they drew a sharp, defining line right through history. They called everything on the other side the Dark Ages, a time of superstition, of stagnation, And on their side of the line, well, that was a rebirth, a renaissance, all about humanism, science, and individual potential. It was an intellectual partition, a complete redrawing of the map of history itself.
Okay, so we've seen lines on maps and lines in history books. Now let's explore a line that's a bit different. It's one that's woven right into the fabric of a society. A line of honor, of conduct, and of class.
So, in feudal Japan, society was sliced up by this rigid social line, and right at the top of that warrior class were the samurai. Now these guys were way more than just soldiers. They were a class set completely apart, defined by their absolute unwavering loyalty to their master and a strict code of honor called Bushido. Their entire identity was built on being on one side of this social line.
And this code was so absolute that it created the ultimate line, the one between honor and disgrace. And for a samurai, that line was exactly the same as the line between life and death. If a warrior was defeated, or if he brought shame upon his master, the code demanded he perform a ritual suicide known as harakiri. It was seen as far, far better to die with honor than to live with the stain of failure. That line, it was everything.
So after looking at all this, a line on a map, a line through ideas, and a line within a society, what does it all tell us about ourselves? And maybe more importantly, who holds the pencil?
Well, we've seen how physical borders, like the Radcliffe Line, can be drawn in a hurry by powerful outsiders. They're often imposed with almost no real understanding of the lives they are about to completely shatter, leading to chaos and just unimaginable tragedy.
And then you have the ideological lines, the ones drawn by intellectuals and artists. By labeling everything that came before as the Dark Ages, Renaissance thinkers didn't just describe history, they effectively created it, shaping how we understand our past and, by extension, our own place in the present. And finally, we've seen how social lines, like the samurai's code of honor, can be drawn from the inside, from within a culture. These lines create these incredibly powerful identities and codes of conduct, so deeply ingrained that they can literally dictate the choice between life and death. So all of this leaves us with one last and I think crucial thought. The lines that divide us, and they're everywhere, right? National, economic, political, social, they are not natural. They are not inevitable. They are drawn by people, always for specific reasons. And perhaps the very first step to understanding our incredibly complex world is just to ask a simple question. Who's holding the pencil?